Council, I'm going to go with Councilman Littman, then we'll go to Councilman Ratson.
Thank you, Mayor. It appears that we're truly between a rock and a hard place with a stalemate. I'm hearing comments now about industrial property, which wasn't, I believe, brought up before as far as decibel change goes, and now it is. I'm hearing comments from Sun City about our sporting events that take place periodically up there, which I hadn't heard much about before. The NB nightclub, another story. I live fairly close to it. I've never heard anything come out of there, but that's another issue. It was suggested a while back that we go to a committee of citizens, staff, and work on this ordinance until we seem to have satisfied the greatest number of people within the community, understanding that we'll never satisfy everybody. I don't care what we do. You remember Will Rogers, you can please some of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time, or thereabouts in a quote. And I would suggest we maybe take it back to committee. Get a little more input on it. I find some things in the ordinance that are not perfect, but I know that when you come to court with an ordinance issue, it's up to interpretation usually anyhow in the courts, and those that enforce them, and it's just a way of life. I looked at the definitions and then read the comments made by a gentleman that seems to be practicing law in Mesquite without a license to do so, because he calls it a legal review, which I find somewhat offensive, not being, I guess, an attorney in Mesquite. The definitions are subject to scrutiny and then interpretation, and as I think Ms. Hunt will agree, and it's been said many times before, 2 lawyers, you get 2 opinions, and 3 lawyers, probably 3 opinions. So maybe it is time to take it back to committee. Now, the downside of taking it back to a committee is Casapalooza is going to be taking place, and in all probability there'll still be no new ordinance on the books one way or another. But it's something maybe we should take a look at, and then just have to live with the fact that summer is going to show up and we have accomplished nothing. The enforcement using that, I think everybody in town that has a grudge against a neighbor can file a complaint. I listen to my neighbor has a waterfall next to me, and that waterfall is louder than my waterfall. And I'm sure if you brought that up, we'd have an issue about drowning out one's neighbor with somebody else's. Likewise, when my neighbor next door kicks on his AC system, I hear it in my house. We're in a real tough situation with this one. And again, trying to do the very best to please the greatest number of people, and realizing that somebody's going to be upset. So maybe it's time to take it back to committee. Take another look at it.
Councilman Ratson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, contrary to what one of the gentlemen said, one of the people here at council does live in that area. And with all due respect, I live right between Mr. and Mrs. Levitt and Mr. and Mrs. Greenway. And I hear the pool parties. I hear the bass line. And I believe it is annoying. I think it's disturbing. It's inconvenient. I believe that. But I do not believe it to the extent that the other residents apparently do. And that's disagreement. That's all that is. No disrespect intended, but I believe that the fact that Mesquite Gaming had 2,900 plus employees when I worked there going on 8 years ago, and it has 1,600 now, that's 1,300 people without a job. they had to pack their families up, pull their kids out of school, and move out of Mesquite. That's more than inconvenient. That's life-changing. And if we keep doing this to business, we've shut down a truck stop, we've shut down a shrimp farm, we're doing whatever we can do, it seems, to stop business in this town. And I gotta tell you, I don't like the sign, I don't like the direction, and that's my personal opinion. I may get four that disagree with me. We've got people that are complaining today about an event that hasn't even happened yet. I mean, that's how crazy this is getting. The next thing you know, somebody's gonna say, the 4th of July celebration that the Lees so graciously put on for this town is too noisy. It exceeds the variance. Let's stop it. The car shows, stop them. I mean, at what point do we have to say, I can put up with a little inconvenience. I can deal with this for the betterment of the whole. And then I also like to say, the one gentleman, the same gentleman, he says, you want to listen to all of us or just the businesses? With all due respect, I see 20, 30 people here. And I don't know that he represents all of the other citizens in Mesquite. Not from what the conversations I've had. So I think that's rather disingenuous or presumptuous to assume that he speaks for everybody in this town. He doesn't. I don't want to kick this can down the road again. I don't want to take it to any committees. There's a nice, whatever it is, soliloquy or whatever it is about committees and what transpires and emerges from a committee. It doesn't look like any animal would recognize. I think staff has gone to great extent to do a reasonable amount of work on this ordinance. I believe we should take it back to where it was before the technical review changes, to where Sergeant Fales originally recommended. I think there needs to be a variance procedure as in the existing regs, and I think there needs to be discretion at the officers. Not every officer is going to be running around with this magic wand here. Somebody's got to say, and Sergeant Fales, how many noise complaints have we had, notwithstanding the Casablanca, in the last several years?
We get noise complaints daily, but they're generally my neighbor upstairs is banging on the floor, or so-and-so down the street is running his stereo too loud. And officers have a lot of, well, the discretion, which is a very key part of being a police officer, is discretion. Without that, we wouldn't need us. But we have, there's state law that we can enforce for different things, plus breach of peace is the general catch-all for someone that is intentionally causing a problem. But on we do probably get daily noise complaints. I would say not daily, but every other, I would say 50% of the days we get a noise complaint about somebody's neighbor or something. But something to this event, other than the Casablanca and then the Envy when it did originally open, we got a few complaints there, but that's a very rare thing. I've been here 13 years as an officer, and those are the only two events that I can really remember that we had a lot of complaints about.
So all of the other complaints that you get on a routine basis are amicably resolved for the most part at the discretion of the officer? I
can only think of maybe a half a dozen in all those times that we actually had to resolve the issue by issuing a citation of them that I was involved in personally.
Very good. Well, thank you. That's my comment.
Thank you, Your Honor. And Mr. Ransom, I'd like to just help you out. Did you know that the camel was formed by a committee? Okay. I just wanted to bring that up. Anyway, I certainly want to express my sympathy to the residents and the businesses involved. But I think if we analyze this with any sense, we're basically limiting this whole conversation to one geographic area in town at the moment. Because I haven't, other than the Sun City comment, we really haven't heard anything from anybody else in town. I had conversations the other day with several different people, and especially about your meter and how they're calibrated and where they work. And early on in this conversation, I heard about noise levels from different cities and how they were calibrated, and use those averages to maybe do what they would like us to do. And I have trouble believing that noise carries the same in Mesquite as it does in Denver, which was brought up. I have trouble believing that it's the same as it is in San Diego, sea level versus 1,600 feet. Denver's at 5,000 feet. Sacramento was mentioned, it's about 1,100 feet. Different noise carries at different levels in different increments. Now, coincidentally, noise might travel a little louder and a little further over a swimming pool on Levitt Lane. Who knows? That could be an underlying cause. I don't know. Maybe you know. Anyway, you know, I've tossed this around and I've read everything that was issued to me, and I don't know how we're going to get a total resolve out of it. From an enforcement end of it, I think we have to pursue the enforcement venues if and when those situations arise. I'm not totally against sitting down and trying to hammer it out with the committee, but we have some decisions to make. Thank you.
Councilman Gustavson.
Thank you, Mayor. Already had it on. I fell asleep there for a minute. You know, this is a no-win situation, obviously. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. It was a no-win situation with our old ordinance because there was no way to determine what those sound levels were. So that was kind of a waste of time anyway. And the new ordinance is kind of a waste of time too, because I don't want to keep beating on this, but you know, my wife and I are looking for a new washing machine, dishwasher. One of our complaints is it was too loud for us, our old one. It's not old, it's only, you know, years old, but it was too noisy for us. So we went down and looked at every dishwasher made and to try to come up with the quietest one we could find. And what we found out is, well, they all run about 50 to 60 decibels. So, you know, if you want to spend $300 or $400 more, you can get one that does 50 decibels. Well, you know, with your machine in the tech meeting, you were sitting there and I saw what I suspected is that just the voice levels were 60, 65, and I know at times you were getting readings of 70. I don't have any confidence in the numbers we have in there. I think they're too low. I just think they're too low because I think if I'm walking down the street and you know, I trip over somebody's empty beer can, I'm probably going to make so much noise with it kicking down the road that I'm going to get arrested. I think that their numbers are too low. And I don't think that, you know, so when we're getting upset because you're raising numbers after you've done all this research, I would counsel the people who are suffering with the noise, and I suffer with the noise too. You know, there was a comment about, well, we don't ever hear it because we live in different places. Well, I live right across from Pulte, and every time there's a game up there, it's directly across from where I live, and I'm right at the same level that there are, so believe me, I hear it. And I see the lights, and you know, I have all the nuisance that I appreciate every one of those people up there that are spending money, and their young families that are bringing people here, they're bringing the kind of people we want. I don't think we can afford to go to such low numbers that we put ourselves in a position that we start hurting the gaming and the golf and everything else because of what is going on down there. There has to be some way where we can sit down like adults with the people at the you know, at the gaming people and with the people who live there and try to come up with, well, if we cut down the base or something and maybe run a couple of demos, let them run the demos instead of us. Because there's the other thing that kind of concerns me too, is that, man, you're making $82 an hour. We can't afford it. Well, you didn't know that way. Yeah. Well, we can't afford to have you running out and people are setting all this stuff up so we can try to figure out how much noise they're going to make. I think we've taken this thing to the extreme that it's really almost laughable. It's not laughable to the people that there, I understand that. But I'm kind of where George is, where I think that because you spent a lot of time and you had numbers after you went all over town that you thought were reasonable so that we wouldn't have everybody in violation when they're just pulling their kids down the street in a wagon and it's got a square tire or whatever. I'm kind of thinking that let's go to where we were before the tech meeting and be done with this, because we can fight this and go through this thing for 20 times, because I've been through the sign wars where we went for 2 years trying to come up with sign ordinances and nobody's happy with them now, even after we spent $50,000 or $60,000 on a very high price attorney that was an expert in the area. Nobody still likes them, so I think we need to move ahead, and I certainly would support what George was talking about.
Councilman Littman.
My comment is, which is it then? Are we going back to what we started with? Are we going with the new numbers? Or are we making another change? And my other comment is directed toward Councilman Rapson, but not in a negative way. We did nothing to stop a truck stop in Mesquite that I'm aware of. And if we did something to stop it, I'd like to know exactly what that was, because I get asked that question frequently about what happened to Flying J, and I don't want to give out any misinformation